All right, we are going to talk about a real history of testosterone, or alternate title could be even the birth of the science of endocrinology. Now, reason for this video, a lot of people I see challenge that bodybuilders, we abuse testosterone, and it was never made for that, and it's just such a crime against mankind almost that we do these things with it, because these drugs are wonderful drugs and they were made to treat wasting diseases and specifically AIDS and things like that, and we abuse them just to build muscle. And even to the degree that hormone replacement therapy, I've seen people argue, young know-nothings, empty heads, which doesn't make them bad, just makes their empty heads right now. I was a bit of an empty head myself at that age. Just is what it is. I didn't even know it. I know it now in retrospect. Even the hormone replacement therapy is to a large extent just complete hogwash and a waste of what these drugs were designed for. We just have to abuse this shit. Well, problem here is that, let me fix that, there we go. Problem here is that that's not what these drugs were designed for. These drugs, in fact, were pretty much from the get designed as therapeutic, as hormone replacement therapy. That's pretty much testosterone replacement therapy is where they came from. So I'm sorry to disappoint anybody who would disagree, but let me explain. There are three major players that you need to know about here. 3 events with 3 people or persons involved either in collaboration or independently at 3 different points in time that really moved this thing forward. And because we could go all over the place with this, there's all kind of stuff. I'm just going to stick to these 3 main players because it's pretty much agreed upon that these are the 3 main cats. So we would start this story in like 1849, pretty long time ago. I wasn't around. Now, please forgive me for my pronunciation of some of these names, okay? Arnold Berthold, he was the curator of, he was also a professor, but he was the curator of the zoo in Göttingen, Germany. Well, he observed that when roosters were castrated, that they ceased fighting, they ceased crowing, they didn't mate anymore, and moreover than that, their comb atrophied, regressed, on top of their head, right? That red looks like a glove on top of their head. And the rooster's normal behavior and comb growth could be restored if he reimplanted the testes. So it's kind of some Frankenstein shit going on. You put the testes back on them, the shit went back to normal. They started mating again, they started crowing again, they started fighting again, and their comb was restored. So he concluded that the testes act upon the blood, and the blood acts upon the whole organism. Thus was the first hormone testosterone discovered, and in fact endocrinology was born. Alright, then we move forward into 1889, but first let's talk a little bit more about Professor Arnold A. Berthold. Alright, lifespan was 1803 to 1861, of Göttingen. Did a series of tests on roosters in 1849 while curator of a local zoo. Found that a rooster's comb is an androgen-dependent structure. Following castration, the comb atrophies, aggressive male behavior disappears, and interest in the hens is lost. Importantly, Berthold also found that these castration-induced changes could be reversed by administration of a crude testicular extract, or prevented by transplantation of the testes. And that's when he came to the conclusion that the testes act upon the blood, and the blood acts upon the whole organism. And there's a little more, but that's all you really need to know. Now, fast forward into 1889. Brown-Sequard and rejuvenation by testicular extracts. Now, this guy's whole name is Get my shit together here. There's a lot of notes I took today. That's how much time I had on my hands. All right, his complete name is Charles Eduard Brown-Sequard, 72-year-old physician and physiologist. And he stood before the Society of Biology, I don't know, it's fucking French, of Paris. Maybe any Frenchmen on here can correct me on this shit? You know, I'm an ignorant American. I barely speak English. I don't even do so well with that anymore. And he announced before the society that he had rejuvenated himself by injections of a testicular extract from guinea pigs and dogs. Amazing, huh? From guinea pigs and dogs. The impact of Brown-Sequard's rejuvenation was profound. When he made public the results of his self-injections, he was a scientist of international stature and a member of the prestigious French Academy of Sciences. Moreover, he's 72 years old, near the end of a distinguished career that had included major contributions to neuroscience and adrenal function. He was heir apparent to Claude Bernard's chair of medicine at the Collège de France. According to one authority, within a year of the Paris presentation, more than 12,000 physicians were administering the extract to their patients. The dramatic self-experimentation and resulting zealous adoption of rejuvenation by many physicians earned wide reportage in a skeptical lay press, stimulating songs, comic poems, satirical writings, and political caricatures. Now, he also, when he presented this before the Société de Biologie of Paris, and he announced that he had rejuvenated himself by these injections. So, writing in Lancet that same year, he described his personal results as follows, quote, "A radical change took place in me. I fully regained my old powers. My limbs showed a decided gain in strength, and with regard to the facility of intellectual labor, a return to my previous ordinary condition became quite manifest during and after the first 2 or 3 days of my experiments." So that's some seriously impressive stuff. So you can understand, with all this being new, nobody ever hearing anything like this, and he's 72 years old, and he held such high regard in the scientific community already for a lifetime of work, that for him to come out and make this announcement in that place and time, people went apeshit. You know, because all older guys, so you can imagine all these distinguished, older scientists and doctors and, all this other, they were probably, just couldn't wait to get their hands on this and stick a needle of this fucking dog fucking nut extract or whatever the hell it was, and inject it and see if they could get this rejuvenation effect, right? So it created a hailstorm of fucking things, like it says, even a lot of skeptical stuff in the lay press, stimulating songs, comic poems, satirical writings, and political caricatures. However, a century later, it's 100 years later, right? This guy's already stirred up all this uproar, and more than 12,000 physicians were administering the extract to their patients within a year. Okay? And then 100 years later, a century later, scientists in Australia attempted to repeat the extraction of male hormones from dog testes, following the methods published by Brown-Sequard in his original work. Testosterone concentrations of the extract were measured by radioimmunoassay. The Australians found that each of the Brown-Sequard injections would have contained only about 100 nanograms of testosterone, whereas daily testosterone secretion in man is about 6 milligrams. Further, the testes does not store testosterone, but releases the hormone upon synthesis into the systematic circulation. Thus, extracts from the testes would not be expected to be particularly rich in testosterone, the authors concluded that, quote, the placebo effect can be powerful even in a highly educated physician. So you can imagine. And Brown-Sequard notes that only effects produced in man by subcutaneous injections of a liquid obtained from the testicles of animals. That's Lancet 2:105, 1889. And I'll put all this stuff where you can find this shit in the description if you want to go read it yourself. So that's pretty outrageous shit if you really just pay attention to what it is said. That's if you could glean anything from between all my mumbling and my rambling. Okay, the third big player, big fish in this this pond, in my opinion, from what I've seen, what I've read, what I gather, was two internists, and that's going to be Carl G. Heller and Gordon B. Myers. When synthetic testosterone became available in the mid-1930s, and when Nobel Prize was awarded for that synthesis in 1939, interest in the new compound, both scientific and commercial, increased. Among those studying the effects of the new hormone were Carl Heller and Gordon Myers, Wayne University endocrinologists working at the Detroit Receiving Hospital. And of course, they were backed by a huge pharmaceutical company, and so everybody wanted a piece of the action by this time. So we're talking 1944 when they published this paper, which they called the Male Climacteric, its symptomatology, diagnosis, and treatment. It was published in 1944. Basically, what they did, they took the TRT idea to the next level and kind of made it, cemented it a little bit more, because through their study, they found that, and they did one of the best studies out of, to date, one of the most complete studies. Although not the first to administer synthetic testosterone, Heller and Myers performed one of the most thorough systematic researches of the time. Their stated mission was to determine if male climacteric has an organic basis and is a true clinical entity. Okay, so basically what they're talking about there is the condition that would require testosterone replacement therapy, what we refer to as low T. That's what they're referring to here when they're talking about male climacteric. Does it have an organic basis, and is it a true clinical entity? And of course they found that yes, it is. And they considered it serious enough that they related it and said that it was pretty much the exact same deal as hypergonadism, right? Isn't that what I'm looking for, a word? Let's look, hypogonadism. Diagnosis of the male climacteric was established in 23 cases by the finding of pronounced elevation in gonadotropic hormone excretion, comparable quantitatively to that occurring in castrates. This was corroborated in all 8 cases subject to testicular biopsy by histologic evidence of testicular atrophy and degeneration. The diagnosis was further supported in all 20 cases treated by specific response to a therapeutic test with androgens. So they pretty much, they came up with the idea that, put forward the understanding that hypogonadism, that guys with low testosterone production, that required TRT. These are different words, of course. They didn't call it TRT. They hadn't coined that terminology yet. They didn't even call it low T. But guys that were not producing enough testosterone due to age, they were actually pretty much identical in symptom-wise to people that suffered from hypogonadism, which means that hypogonadism can occur if it occurs in your youth. You know, your testes maybe don't drop, they don't produce testosterone, and it causes all kind of problems. It's a very serious issue. It can also occur in adulthood. It can occur to men and women. It can occur in regard to estrogen production or testosterone production in men. And then it breaks down into two subcategories with different names for each sex, male or female. But that was pretty serious stuff. So the importance of that, of what they did as being the third big player, is that they pretty much nailed the lid on it, that yes, it's a done deal. We need to prescribe testosterone to treat this in these men because it's as serious every bit as hypogonadism. Anyway, to wrap this thing up, finally, this is a complicated video for me. To wrap this shit up, testosterone, the entire motivation behind it was pretty much initially it was just an observation. You know, the first guy, when they removed the testes from the rooster, you know, the rooster changed, you put the testes back on the rooster, rooster's good to go again. So that was, you know, the guy realized something's in the blood coming out of those testicles, or those testes have something to do with the effect of the blood, and the blood has an effect on the whole organism, whatever's in the blood from the testes. So that's what he drew a conclusion from that. And then the next guys took the ball and took it a little bit further. And he was a guy that experimented on himself because he was declining in age and health. He was 72 years old, well-respected researcher and scientist, physician, and he injected himself with this serum. And now, was it all completely placebo effect, even for this advanced researcher with all this experience at that age? Or did he really realize, did he actually realize some benefit from it, even in, you know, minute amounts, that the androgen was probably present, as we know, you know, later, found out later. We don't know. And then, of course, later on, the next big step that I mentioned and point out is when the big drug companies become involved. And it was Shring or whatever, you know who I'm talking about, used to make Testosterone Depot, right? U.S. drug company. They got involved with the big money and backed the studies, and that was still pretty early. And because they were chasing this hormone replacement therapy, that they saw the market from the get, and that's what they were going after. That's what they were going after. The guy injected himself. He was so desperate to cure himself of his declining health and the ailments that he was experiencing as he, his body degraded, and he realized that it was a testosterone-related thing. And so he was willing to even inject himself with this serum or whatever he had made up from guinea pig and dog testes, right? So from the get, that was the motivation behind it. That's why men, you know, really took the research. That's the direction he went in way early on, and that's where we got to today. So that's why it was done, and that's what it was for. And of course, later on, it was used to treat a lot of other things, and it branched off into, you know, a multitude of drugs, offshoots of that, and analogs, and to specifically address other things they were trying to treat, you know, like for burn victims and for, you know, regeneration of skin and flesh, just tissue, you know, all these other things. But initially, that's where it all came from. Hormone replacement therapy, that's the purpose, that's the why, that was the motivation behind all of it. Because man didn't want to stop making testosterone. He didn't want to live that way. He wanted to upgrade. He wanted to maintain his quality of life. He wasn't ready to not be a man anymore. He wanted to be the same man as he was when he was younger, as much as he was capable. You know, wrapping this thing up at long last, The only other thing I really want to point out that I think is important that I don't let slip by here and get away from me is the accent on the reality that, Charles Edward Brown-Sequard, right, the French physician, a physiologist at 72 years old that injected himself with the shit, right? That guy, what he was doing it for. And then when he came out and announced that, and what he believed it had done for him, then what happened? Before the end of the year, 12,000 physicians were prescribing it and administering it to their patients. So there was a huge demand. And what year was that? Again, 1889. All right? So, then when we got to the last key event, that's why I say, Carl G. Heller and Gordon B. Myers, these two guys, they published this in 1944. The guys at the Detroit Receiving Hospital, the endocrinologists, and the ones that compared it to hypogonadism, right? That just sealed it up. And who were they sponsored by? Who was backing them? Schering or whatever, right? Huge pharmaceutical company. So you see, they knew the market was there. They saw what had happened in, 18 whatever. They saw when Sequard injected himself with that shit, how within a year you had 12,000, physicians with patients lined up, men that wanted the same kind of treatment, that they don't want to get old either. They don't want to go through this shit either. All right, so ever since then, it's the same thing to this day. The drug companies saw the market for it, they put the money out there, and they pushed it, and that's how we got to where we are, because we had the money and the research to get behind it. And it's the same thing throughout, okay? Anybody tries to tell you something different is full of shit. I mean, look at the Cialis issue now, the tadalafil, right? Okay, one day they're going to say, oh yeah, that tadalafil, isn't that that's an effective drug that they've been using to counteract the wasting of muscular dystrophy, particularly Becker's, right? Remember that video I made? Yeah, but where did that drug come from? Because guys couldn't get it up anymore. That's the motivation, okay? Yeah, it turns out it has all kind of other, fucking awesome uses, and it does a lot of other good things. It lowers blood pressure. It doesn't increase heart rate. It doesn't put any additional pressure on the optic nerve. All kind of good shit, right? And now they're working with muscular dystrophy patients with it, because then, it doesn't downregulate the NO2, and they can actually uptake the NO2, they can get a pump, and it's a key player in building muscle. They're finding a huge player. So, but where did it first come from, the birth of it? What was the motivation? Drug companies behind it for what? Because guys couldn't get their fucking dick up anymore. So nobody wants to get old. Nobody wants to walk around with a flaccid fucking penis. Like it or not, man, there's still a certain primate level, a certain fucking, the primitive part of our fucking brain, right? And, the caveman in us. That's why these things come to fruition. That's where they come from. It's where they come from. It was no different with testosterone. So all this foo-foo talk today about, oh, you should, that testosterone is such a horrible thing, and that's not what it was invented for. That's exactly what the fuck it was invented for. All these other uses are just great benefits, side benefits, no question. But if it wasn't for guys experiencing going through low T, they wouldn't have been looking at it like that, and the drug companies wouldn't have gotten behind it. And it's the same thing with the tadalafil. If it wasn't for guys that couldn't get it up anymore, they would never have even moved into that neighborhood. All right, so that's it. Take care. Have an awesome evening. And I will see you guys again very shortly.